research is very clear that women's sexuality peaks in our late 60s and early 70s if we're not in the 51% who aren't having sex. In other words, it does not have to be worse. It's just going to be different. So if you have what in this context I'll call a fixed mindset and have the belief that the best sex of your life requires a 25-year-old body and, it's only downhill from there, then yeah, menopausal sex is gonna suck. But it's not because of menopause, it's because of the societal conditioning and an inadequate mindset to meet what life brings.
Welcome to the Open Bedroom Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Kalo. Welcome to conversations about open relationships, online dating, conscious uncoupling, and creating the relationship that truly aligns for you.
Okay.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I have a returning guest, Dr. Alexandra Stockwell on. She is the author of Uncompromising Intimacy. I have the book over here. And if you have watched our episode, it's interesting. It's something different that I've never done before and probably Alexandra's never done before. We ended up doing a live coaching session. She therapized me on the podcast episode. And I always say literally saved my relationship with Scott. We were going to a polyamorous therapist who said, y'all are going to have to break up. You cannot reach any kind of a compromise and you can't seem to find a way to be in partnership together that isn't causing all this angst. And then I was interviewing her for the podcast about something else and it ended up being this whole coaching session. So thank you, Alexandra, for saving my relationship. Alexandra is a medical doctor, obviously an author, and a coach in the health, wellness, sexual, yummy space. And she just released a new book, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The new book is called The Invitation: Vital Conversations About Menopause. And it's such a beautiful cover, so feminine. I love the blue. That is your signature blue. So I'm going to stop here and let you further introduce yourself in the book, and let's chat about this.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It is always a fun, juicy conversation with you, whether we're talking about sex or wallpaper or what kind of toothpaste or I don't know what. It's always so fun. And I love, in fact, in many ways, that's one of the purposes of my new book is to have that kind of conversation about menopause. I do just right at the beginning want to say that I have a co-author. She's not here in this conversation, Trisha Brook, who is she's an amazing woman. She's a really expert speaking coach. She used to be the curator of TEDx Lincoln Square, which is one of the most successful TEDx platforms. She has been on Broadway. She's an award-winning documentary filmmaker. She has a fitness business. She grew up in rural Missouri and then moved to New York and danced on Broadway. So she is not a medical doctor and she has all this expertise, but not in menopause. And I am a medical doctor, although I'm not practicing medicine. I'm a full-time relationship and intimacy coach. And I didn't come to this book or to this conversation as a medical expert in menopause. We really came to the topic as two sovereign women who were really surprised by our menopause experiences and also just really aware of the total void of conversation. It's normal to be talking about cramps and I don't know, going on vacation and all kinds of different things are normal. What book did you read and how's the weather? And here, anyone who lives long enough, who's a woman, is going to experience menopause. It is a universal phenomenon. And there's exactly no men who are not unconsciously, profoundly impacted by menopause, other than perhaps celibate monks in caves, or there are men where that is an exception. But by and large, this is part and parcel of who we are as women, and the total absence of it as a topic was really the context for Trisha calling me and saying, I want to write a book about menopause and I want you to be my co-author. So when thinking about the conversation with you, Jen, just knowing that like we can riff and with this context, so much is already open to interesting dialogue, but also specifically on the Open Bedroom podcast, where you are all about taking what is unspoken, unknown, unseen, taboo, but important, and bringing it into light in whatever way works for any people involved. I feel like that very thing, taking what is invisible, unseen, mysterious, ignored, not acknowledged, and bringing it into light, is one of the most important acts. It's a rebellion and an invitation. And, you know, that really is the context for the book, the invitation, vital conversations about menopause. So I have a lot more to say about that, but let me start there.
I'm so excited. I have like 3 components of questions that I want to ask you about. And the first thing is really just a reflection of what you just said and this realization that I had as you were speaking. That if you look at the archetype of the maiden, the mother, and the crone, right? This is the celebration of moving from mother into crone. And if we look at maiden to mother, like there's the sweet 16, there's your 18th birthday, there's graduation, like there's all these celebrations. You get your period, you have a period party. I mean, I don't know, whatever is going on with 16-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds today. It's a beautiful, like, experience, and we're celebratory. And then there's the maiden to mother, which you get the baby shower and you're honored as a mother and this whole new thing, this thing that you're stepping into, this whole new archetype into your life. And we're mothers for, 20 years, forever, but mothering, 18, 20 years, whatever. We send them off into the world. And then I haven't experienced, but you have a son now in college, right? I think I saw a note about that. Don't you have an older kid?
I do. Well, my oldest will be 27 this month, and then I have a 24-year-old.
But you have younger kids
really
too.
Said much about myself. I have an 18-year-old, and I also have an 11-year-old. I had kids in my 20s, early 30s, late 30s, and 40s. So I've got the whole range. Yes.
Yeah, you're spanning. I mean, you're not a maiden anymore. You've been mother for a while, but you're like moving towards crone, and so am I. I mean, my kids are 12 and 15. I turn 40 in like 2 months. Like I'm feeling my body changing. And also having all these, conversations about sex and our bodies and lubrications and hormones and watching as everyone my age, our hormones are shifting and changing and our sex drives are anyway, there's no celebration from mother
Not
to
only
crone.
You are so spot on. I didn't like do some weird facial expression, but inside I'm just like glowing and excited because our book, The Invitation, Vital Conversations About Menopause, is literally a conversation between Trisha and me. It is written as a conversation, and we have exactly the kind of conversation that you and I are having. And so I love that you are spot on, keyed into this really important thing, like phenomenon. But there's more to say about that. And part of it is that the cultural meme, largely unspoken, but it's there influencing us, is that menopause is a very dehydrated state. Yes. It is the beginning of the end. Yes. Everything shrivels up.
Never having sex again.
Yeah.
No desire.
In terms of sex, in terms
Pleasure's
of
over.
Contribution. Yeah. It is like a total over the hill situation phase. However, as Trisha and I were talking, what became so clear to me, and hearing you reminded me, it's just so to the point that actually there is a missing archetype, because there's the maiden and the mother, and there is a missing archetype before the crone. The crone, crone means different things, but in general, like we associate that with old wise woman. Like the crone is 80, 90. Like her contribution is to listen and speak and to kind of, one goes to her for wisdom. That is the role of the crone, but that is totally missing the third archetype, which really, yes, it's the perimenopausal, menopausal woman in, I mean, sometimes mid 40s, 50, 55, whatever. Let's just go with 50 to 70. That, you know, you mentioned a 20-year span. And of course, people have children at different ages and so forth, but more or less, you know, maiden for 20 plus years, mother for approximately 20 years. And then in a beautiful long life, there really is a missing archetype before crone of 20 years. And that missing archetype is for the woman who is no longer concerned about contraception, is no longer wiping babies' butts unless she wants to choose to do that as a grandma, potentially.
Right.
But this is a woman who is an incredible asset in the workforce. This is a woman who has internal space and actual space in her calendar to figure out what lights her up, what is her purpose, how does she want to contribute. This is a woman who has nothing to lose in doing things her own way if she taps into this archetype in its evolved, enlightened form. This is a woman who has not just the accumulated integrated wisdom, but also a tremendous capacity to act and serve, and to do so from a very, very different place than the home-based activity of caring for children or beginning professionally. And it kind of makes sense that we're missing this archetype. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I don't want to say it like that. That's demeaning the reality here. But I just want to say that in evolutionary terms, it's relatively recent that we have such a long life expectancy. And so the whole period, let me use a different word to be more clear, since that means menstruation. The whole phase of menopause, it's like we have access to that biologically, but our identity, our societal thinking about it have not evolved along with the physiological opportunities. And we're really missing that archetype. And one of the ways to evoke her is to have conversations about our experiences, to ask questions, to do exactly what you and I are doing on this podcast. And let me just do a spoiler alert. Like, I hope that anybody listening, no matter your gender orientation and life's context, I hope that this inspires you to ask more questions and have more dialogue and share your own experience. And I'm like covering a lot of ground right here, but I just want to bring it in as close to the beginning as possible, that for this book, The Invitation, Vital Conversations About Menopause, some of our most enthusiastic early readers are men who are at a time when they know things are changing, but it's a big black box. And quite frankly, it's a big black box, except that it smells of rot for women anticipating this. And in order to really have the kinds of connection and depth and sex and loving support and a kind of openness for the emergence of this third archetype in any individual's life, we of course need our men to be a part of that conversation. And it's affecting things in the workplace too. So even if it's not relevant at home, it's a big influence.
Oh my God. It's so much fun, by the way, to have a podcast episode with a fellow podcaster, because we opened the doors along the way to lead the breadcrumbs for you to ask questions, which you've done a beautiful job, because the questions I came into this episode with, you have already cracked 2 doors that I wanted to ask. So let's go with the men thing, and then we'll go to the hormone thing, which is the big second question that I have. So just last week, I had a beautiful voice DM left on Instagram from one of my guy friends who's actually been on my podcast before. And he's like, Jen, do you have any advice for men with women going through menopause? He was like, I love my partner. I love my wife. She's all of a sudden, we've had super sexy lives, like we've gone and we've played and we have had tons of sex and we've been super explorative. And something has drastically changed just in the last few months. She's starting to go through menopause. She is dry. She has zero libido. She's exhausted. She's freaking hot all the time. And she's cranky. And like, I want to help her and I love her so much. And I don't know what to do. Like, as a man, how can I support her? And so I'm going to toss the question to you. Like, what can you just delve more into this man thing? How can men be supportive roles? How can they help identify that it's happening? How can they love their women through it and not make us feel like dried up crones that,
Yeah.
Tell
So
me.
there's so much to say, and I'm going to say a bunch of things, and they're not ranked in order of which I say them.
Okay.
So first of all, to this friend and podcast guest, bravo. And you are not alone. Like, this is something that I wasn't aware of until we wrote this book. And in fact, Trisha and I were interviewed together by a man whose wife is going through menopause. He's never covered menopause. I mean, he's actually a ghostwriter and a writing coach. And so he interviewed us from the angle of it being a new book, but most of the conversation was about menopause. And he just had one profound question after the other. And his wife was like, I can't believe you did an episode, but it's like, it's relevant. And he knows that. And this friend of yours, and in fact, when Trisha or I have mentioned in whatever context, someone will say, what projects are you working on? Let's say in a mastermind, and I'm co-authoring a book on menopause. It's men as much as women who say, I really need to read that. So that's just like point number one. Point number two is, in terms of how a man can be supportive, speaking at home in a heteronormative context, one of the things that happens for the vast majority of women is it can feel very shameful to go through menopause. Like, so much of our identity, even when it's unconscious, and look, even when we don't actually have children, that so much of our identity is wrapped up in a kind of youthfulness and fertility and a certain vibrancy, and whether, hormones are used to stop menstruation or not. There's just a certain identity that we have while we are menstruating women. And none of the symptoms that are like generally accepted and that many women go through, none of those symptoms are appealing. Now, another reason we wrote the book is because there's a whole range of experiences, just like there's a whole range of experiences in having sex, in giving birth. It is also true in menopause. I personally have had almost zero symptoms, and I don't take anything and I don't do anything. It just never came and bit me in the ass. Now, I don't think it's quite as random as that, but I'm just saying that is the case. And Trisha, who's had loads of hot flashes, like, she's learned to just be like, oh, I'm so hot. There's actually a book called Hot and Bothered. And she really like took the hot flashes as a kind of erotic stimulation. So not the night sweats, that's different, but the hot flashes. So one of the things we really do in our book is attempt to paint the breadth of experiences. And so someone can definitely, and we interviewed 3 women who had very challenging experiences in menopause. And so, yes, so many women do feel dried up. But I just really want to be clear, I guess we'll call this point number 2, that each woman's experience is individual. And without being scientific about it, we came to some conclusions about what are the most important variables other than the physiological ones that contribute to who has an easier journey and who has a challenging journey. Maybe we can talk about that. But then the third point I want to make is that for most women who are going through a really hard time, because of this identity shift away from being able to eat less and then lose weight, and being able to sleep well, and being able to lubricate oneself, and then any number of those things, are like 43 symptoms of menopause, can come, and it can feel like she can't help it. And it's somehow, most women have some sense that there's something wrong with them, that they can no longer, like, they feel at war with their body sometimes because it won't behave properly. And part of that can often include shame. So everything I was just saying about how challenging it can be is to say that it can include a lot of shame and embarrassment. And it's actually kind of incredible how many women just don't discuss it with their spouses because it feels shameful, and like they're sort of failing the marriage, and like not able to contribute who they really are, and like their perimenopause or menopause is somehow like a burden for their spouse. And so in terms of the men, how to support, to ask questions and listen generously. And the kinds of questions can be, what are you experiencing? How are you thinking about it? But really, I would say start with, what do you need right now? So, for example, in fact, one of the women we interviewed in the book, she gets hot flashes, so she wants the air conditioning on. But her husband won't do that. And so he turns it, so it's, the air conditioning isn't as strong, as opposed to Trisha's husband, who, when he sees she's having a hot flash, he turns up the AC and goes and gets himself a sweater.
Love that.
And it's not, when he just goes and gets himself a sweater, or now they have, a throw on their couch that they didn't used to have, in this unspoken way, it conveys, I love you. I'm glad you're here. I'm here for you. We're in this together, in this totally simple way. It's like if your spouse doesn't like asparagus, then you're not going to cook asparagus unless they're on vacation.
Right.
And similarly, if it's really hot, then, if she's having a hot flash, turn up the AC and get yourself a sweater. Yeah. Or if she's sweating at night, I think one thing that also happens is a man doesn't want to be in a soggy, wet bed, so he'll go sleep somewhere else, and then she's left feeling rejected. In that situation, there's so many options. One is you can, lay a blanket out, and then when the sweat comes, you just remove it. Or
I love that idea. I'm thinking too, like a waterproof blanket. And I know that sometimes they feel like you're sleeping on a pad and it's kind of weird, but that would be a good idea of like putting some more protection maybe above the bed sheets if you're super sweaty.
Yeah. And actually, Trisha describes, whatever works. The main thing is to be in it
Put a
together.
fan on you.
Yeah, like she shouldn't need to figure this out and do it with the least amount of interruption in his usual experience. This is something to do together. And so this I just find very sweet. I haven't experienced night sweats, so I don't have my own experience to talk about, but Trisha has. And so when she gets really hot, she does this thing where she lifts her arms up almost like a 4-year-old, and he takes her shirt off, and then puts another one on, but it's just so caring and loving. And so I think often when a man a man can perceive, oh, she's not that available for sex, and that's the only thing that he perceives. No, there is so much more going on. So that's one thing. Another thing that's really important, which I feel is true anytime there's, quote, low libido, is that, sure, there are some physiological things going on, and it can be very helpful to get hormone replacement therapy, and there are a variety of options. But fundamentally, when your partner isn't interested in having sex, and I don't just mean like one night, but that's the trend, then unquestionably, no matter what else is at play, you're not offering the kind of sex that she wants more of. And it's not the man's job to figure that out on his own when a woman is in menopause. Like it is a joint project, but it just means that it's time for the evolution of your sex life, not for it to slow down, stall out, and become complicated and painful for her. No, it means, okay, we've just graduated that phase of our sex life, and we're on to the next one. You may not know your major yet, but you definitely know you're in college, not in high school anymore.
I love this. Okay, I want to dive a little more into this because we're both intimacy coaches, me more for the open relationship space and, you more for married couples. Oh my God, this is so delicious. What I found, I got so many red flags as you were talking, and one of them was being at war with your body and including this feeling of shame and embarrassment. And I instantly went to men and ED issues, because Scott and I occasionally experience this. And it's so frustrating when your body won't get an erection when you want one. And I've had 3 men tell me the same story in the last week. Like, I was at this swinger event and there was this guy. This is probably TMI for you. I'm just going to say it because I think my people will understand. But, there was a gangbang and I was first in line and I was supposed to be the one that was like starting everything. And my dick just sat there. And so I think that there's comparative. It's interesting because I think as women, it's really easy to throw some lube on your guy and go for it, or, apply some lube below and you can still have sex. But men are feeling shame and embarrassment frequently when they're having ED issues, which of course comes with age and changing of hormones. And the second thing that I thought, and then I'll shut up and let you talk again. The second thing I thought immediately was, geez, if you aren't learning to have deep, conscious communication in your sex lives in your 20s and in your 30s and into your 40s, as you hit menopause and all of a sudden all these things are shifting and changing, how are you going to have those conversations automatically on the spot just because menopause happened to you? It feels like the muscle needs to be there.
If you haven't been having them, then one of two things happens. Meaning having conscious conversations about sex. Either this is the portal that leads to that, or you have the unfortunate opportunity to join the 51% of women over 50 who are no longer having sex. And that does not inherently need to be what happens in menopause. It requires conscious conversation. It requires valuing oneself. I mean, the 3 women we interviewed in the book who had really heartbreaking experiences with menopause, one with a very supportive spouse, 2 not so much. And in fact, one was really interesting to me. It was a second marriage for him second marriage for her too. But he was a little bit older, and his first wife had been through perimenopause previously. And so he just was clear that the woman we interviewed, her experience was not as bad as she was saying, because he'd seen how perimenopause and menopause worked. But that just really gets to the point that every woman's experience is different, and it can evolve. So, and then the other woman who had a real challenge because she didn't realize what was going on. It started really in her mid-late 30s, and she's a nurse, and she didn't attribute it to menopause. She just thought she was an overworked professional who was just like wiped out, exhausted at the end of the day, which is a totally reasonable thing.
Valid.
But really, the relationship most impacted was the one with her husband, because he took it personally. He took her lack of interest and availability for sex as a rejection of him. And he didn't necessarily, I mean, we didn't talk about him that much, but he obviously, like so many people and so many men, didn't have the skills to be objective and not take it as a personal rejection. Whereas the third woman that we interviewed, she also had a very, very challenging time with menopause. Sex was painful, and her husband never put pressure on her and was just really very loving and open to whatever adjustments she needed to make. So I know that it reminds me a little bit of, that poster, these are the things you should have learned in kindergarten. Like, just ask what is needed, ask what would be helpful. Like the key to great sex, the key to great open relationships, and the key to long-lasting passion in a monogamous marriage as well, all of those, the way I would say it, is they are the excellence in all of those areas are contingent on, at least to some degree, having a growth mindset. In other words, being open to learn and grow and understand that as life happens, we can evolve and meet the circumstances differently, because there's nothing inherently worse about sex in your 50s, 60s, or 70s. In fact, the research is very clear that women's sexuality peaks in our late 60s and early 70s, if we're not in the 51% who aren't having sex. In other words, it does not have to be worse. It's just going to be different. So if you have what in this context I'll call a fixed mindset, and have the belief that the best sex of your life requires a 25-year-old body, and it's only downhill from there, then yeah, menopausal sex is gonna suck. But it's not because of menopause. It's because of the societal conditioning and an inadequate mindset to meet what life brings.
I hope that you've enjoyed part 1 of episode number 125, Menopause, Men, and Happiness, Navigating This Time with Your Partner, with Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. This is over an hour-long podcast, so I went ahead and broke it into 2 episodes. Part 2 will come out this coming Sunday, where we talk a little bit more about actual tactical steps of how to support you if you're going through menopause, or if you're a male partner or a female partner and you're supporting someone going through menopause. And we also talk a little bit more about Alexandra's beautiful and beautifully written book, The Invitation, Vital Conversations About Menopause, that she co-authored with Trisha Brock. So I really hope that you guys come back for the second part of this really juicy conversation. Hey there, did you know that I do online coaching? Yes, I do online coaching in the sex and relationship space. Some of the topics that are near and dear to my heart are open relationships. So that includes polyamory, swinging, or what we call the lifestyle. I also love conversations around online dating. We're talking Bumble, Tinder, Field, and more. And then the last thing that's really passionate and close to my heart is conscious uncoupling. That means we get to break up with people with love and respect, with dignity and hope. We get to create a life for our children that gets to be a little bit different. We can do things better than we have in the past. So if any of these topics sound interesting to you and you'd love to get some coaching from me, check out the link in the show notes or the link in my bio for more information on Coaching with Jen.